Hey everybody, as 2023 comes to an end, I thought I'd put together a sort of best of compilation from some of our Pro Group calls. For those of you that don't know, the Pro Group is our membership service aimed at podcast editors who want some guidance on the business side of editing. It combines my experience in the podcast editing space with Tara's branding and marketing background and Amanda's business operations and consulting experience. We don't believe in telling you how to do things our way. Our goal is to help you find your own way, because running a business isn't a one-size-fits-all endeavor. So here you go. Here's our 2023 compilation from our Pro Group calls. I hope you enjoy.
The third thing I changed about myself was I went out of my way to understand the entire process of content creation, from idea to ear with podcasting, all of the different job roles. And what this gave me an opportunity to do was understand what the clients had been through before they get to me. Audio's the last stage of things, audio editing or mixing, right? So once I got a better understanding of what people have been through to get to that point of working with me, I was able to talk to them in their own language and empathize and resonate. And it meant that when I worked with clients, my relationship was so much better, so much quicker. The levels of trust I could develop were just awesome. And it also gave me an in of understanding what I might have to fix. With podcast editing, it's things like we know that people are just recording in their bedrooms, or we know that people are recording in their glass offices and there's traffic going by. And if I'm an editor and I just go back and go, this sounds terrible, this is awful, in the end I'm going to stop that podcast creator just creating because they don't feel they're good enough. And that's a real problem, that I found myself being negative towards the content I was working on because I, in my head, felt it could be better. And I wasn't analysing the process and understanding how far has this thing come to get to me. And it's my job to enhance, not to hinder.
It took a while on the editing side for me to really find my groove. I put more pressure on myself than I needed to get my rhythm, learning. I think we were chatting one time, and I was saying that I finally got to a point where in my DAW, I can look at the waveform and it's like being in the Matrix, right? You can see the conversation and background noise and clicks and different things like that. But it took me a while to get there. And when, as a business, I'm saying, okay, I can have this, here's my turnaround time. And I'm spending, 8-9 hours just trying to get, a 45-minute podcast done. That was so frustrating because, in my mind, what I'm hearing from Chris Kern School is, oh yeah, well, it only takes about 4 hours to get an hour podcast done. But yeah, that's with experience. It takes a while to get to that point, and you may even be able to do better. And it really also depends on how much of the work you're doing, right? How much of the processing. Are you just editing out the word fillers and things like that? Or are you processing the audio, EQing it, and all those sorts of things? But that was frustrating, and it was difficult for me to get to a point where I was comfortable with adding new clients and saying, yes, I could do this within a certain amount of time period.
But I think a lot of people, certainly in compression, people get caught up in the minutia of what it is. And for sure, for years, I'm like, on paper, I understand what compression is. But then when you finally understand how it sounds and you hear it for the first time, you're like, okay, now I understand. And now I'm experimenting more with attack and release times to make things sound the way that I need it to. And you start going back to your previous work and like, well, everything sounds overcompressed, because it is. And then you start to understand, okay, over time, the more you do it, the better you're going to get, and there's going to be better results. It's not an overnight thing, so you got to stick with it and take your time. But you're going to notice over time, as you work more, you're going to hear more things, and the quality is going to improve the more that you do it. And in part, the tools are a part of that. but it's more so your application of the tools and those techniques, and just the basic understanding of audio engineering and how everything comes together is really going to be more useful. And I was one of those early on in my career. It was, I want the latest and greatest plugins and toys and things like that. Now I have massive plugin folders of stuff that I don't even use anymore because I found other tools that do a better job. And I think that's often a question that I see a lot of people ask, especially in Facebook groups and stuff, is when should I buy new plugins? And my thought process over time has changed to the plugins that you're using. If you can't get out of them what you need, that's the time to then upgrade. So the stock plugins for most audio processing, all that stuff is really, really good. So it's a matter of cut all the bells and whistles out of all the other stuff and just understand and learn the fundamentals of the proper way to use EQ and compression and things like that to get it to sound really good. And then you can expand from there to all the crazy toys and things like that that come from that. So just learning what you already have access to, which essentially you already bought or using the software where there's stuff already in it, so you don't need to spend any more money. And there's tons of different stuff that you can find, books and YouTube videos and stuff like that. But of course, doing the YouTube video thing is kind of take that with a grain of salt because there's so much out there and it's really hard to weed through what's actually beneficial and what's actually good. So also just kind of networking and meeting other people and talking to other engineers and people that, in a sense, you trust. You know, they have careers and are doing that for a living. So they're also good people to ask, hey, do you have any other techniques that I could use for EQing and things like that? I mean, I remember working at a studio a couple years ago. I just challenged myself for like 6 months. I did 0 boost EQing. I did all just cut EQ and compression for everything. And it was an interesting thing because it made me, all right, I need to position microphones better to get things the way that I want them to. And understanding the recording aspects and recording technology of mic placement and working with the artist to get better takes to create better quality. So that's another thing too, is understanding, and if you're working with the artists or the guests and things like that on proper technique and things like that, will make a better show by and large.
When you look at text on a screen, you want to instinctively correct every mistake to make it perfect. And when we speak, we are anything but perfect. So trying to apply the text editing approach to dialogue, it just doesn't work. And that's one of the reasons why so many people struggle when they script stuff out, because it's not written the way that they naturally speak. It's written the way they would naturally write. And that chase for perfection, as more people are doing text to audio editing, does cause some problems.
Oh, yes. And again, I've watched it evolve and watched the increase in, I want to say naivety, for people coming in thinking that, wow, I've got this great program that I can use for my editor now, that I don't need an editor because I've got this program that click of the button and we can take out all the filler words and shorten all the word gaps and look at the, like you said, read it and think that it's going to then translate the same as what we hear in our ears. And it's a bit like the teleprompter, right? When we're learning to read off a teleprompter, it's a very different skill to transfer and translate that into a conversation or a manageable / easy to listen to conversion, rather than just reading it word for word and sounding quite robotic. It takes a skill to be able to listen to the conversation outside the text on the screen and hear like the inflections and all of the other bits and pieces that we hear as editors. And why are we then thinking that the conversation does need to look like a book or listen or hear like a book? Because podcasting itself is its own unique conversation and platform. It's not social media. It's not text. in its entirety unless we are reading a script, which we hardly ever are in a conversation.
But sometimes business can be very, I don't want to say brutal, but for us as editors, small business men and women, the relationships that we build sometimes become personal because we enjoy working with these people, and they have every right to explore their options and part ways with us. However, sometimes, like you were saying, when it's done in a very sneaky, I'm just going to cut the cord, and behind your back, it is a tremendous punch in the gut. And it just, it's almost soul snatching, because you've worked so hard to build up this relationship, and it's just gone. And that's why I say, I keep using the word relationship. The money is great. Sure, we want the money. We want to be self-employed. But when you put that much time and effort into building up your business, there are relationships there. And part of being a business owner is knowing how to maintain and keep the relationships and asking the right questions of your clients, which you only learn through time. There isn't a course that's going to teach you everything and you know it up front, because not every person is the same. So just like if anyone who has children knows, you don't treat all of your children the same way. They all have their own personalities and you engage and interact with them differently. And the same is true with business. And sometimes you will have those that will leave, but it all comes back, I believe, that you'll get someone else to replace them. It may not be for the same amount of money initially. Maybe it will, maybe it'll be more. But the one thing that has to be tried and true is your consistency and your approach towards the business and the creative, like how you are operating within the business. You want to be consistent there. And then the entity itself, the business.
You work with a very well-defined niche. Have you found that causes problems? Because one of the things I see a lot of people say is, how am I going to find enough clients if I niche down?
No, I'm actually 100% convinced that because I niche down is the reason I'm still in business today. And the reason for that is because, one, I do work with people who take their podcast seriously. They treat it as a tool for their business, so they are willing to invest in it, which means that A, they're willing to pay me, and B, they're willing to pay me well. And they also tend to network with people who are in the same space that they are. They're also coaches and consultants. So I grew my business in the beginning mostly through just referrals. Everyone that I worked with, if anybody approached them and said anything about starting a podcast or needing help with a podcast, I was their go-to person. And that's really how I built everything up at first. And then even in the editor side of things, on, the networking side of things for my business, when people would approach other editors and it wasn't quite what they like to work on, they knew that they could refer them out to me if they were, a female coach or consultant. And that happened a lot as well. So being known as the person who works with a particular type of person, it makes it a no-brainer for people to refer people to you.
One of those big pre-working with red flags, it's the whole budget thing. I know there are different trains of thought as to whether you should get pricing out of the way early on or wait until you have the conversation. In some cases, both make sense, but I think for a lot of us, you're better off getting the money out of the way up front, even if you're not committing to a price. But if you give them, my general range for this type of project starts at whatever that rate is. If they're nowhere in the ballpark, then it's a nice clean cut. You're not putting a lot of extra time into crafting this really nice proposal when they're going to say, oh, well, I can get somebody on Fiverr to do it for half that. And if they say they can get somebody on Fiverr to do half that, let them. That's not the client that you want.
Exactly. You want to talk about money on the first call. because I know when I was starting out, I made that mistake because money was just such a touchy subject. I was afraid to address it. That's when the most conflict would happen. And it's like, oh, I'm excited about this project. I really want to get this job. But how do I bring up money? How do I even find out if we're in the same ballpark? And so when I first started out, I would just be like, okay, let me hear what you want, and then I will work up a quote for you. Because in my mind, okay, that's easier. They can say yes or no. So I would do that, except, I had this big, gorgeous proposal that I would put together that was multi-pages, and I'd put all this effort into it. I'd probably spend like an hour or two on these proposals and send it off, and that's way out of my budget. Or they would ghost me. More often than not, we just wouldn't hear from them again. And I was getting exhausted. I was like, man, I'm putting all this time and effort into things. And it really, when you're putting in that much effort into getting work and then they ghost you, I mean, it just sucks. It's a really frustrating feeling. And so I was actually watching some of Chris Do's videos in the future, and one of the biggest piece of advice he's given is talk about money right away and say it confidently. So, if something is $5,000, then you just state, great, that's going to be, I estimate that to be between $5,000 and $7,000. And you say it just like that. You don't say it, $5,000, which a lot of people do.
You don't want it to be a question.
No. I think that's hard for a lot of people, especially when you're just starting out, to just confidently state, this is the estimate range that I'm expecting this to be. Does that work for you? And then you go quiet. You don't say anything else.
Don't follow it up with an apology. You don't have to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, but this is what it costs." Like, no, you're not sorry. It's kind of it's something that it's fortunate for us that we have a little the ability to take the emotion out of it, and that's harder for some people. But it's really important to do, I think, when it comes to the money talks, because it can be uncomfortable for everybody, and you don't want to throw out a high number and then have them completely go away. But at the same time, if they are condescending in their remarks about your starting estimate range, that's not your problem. They'll probably try to talk down at you and like, well, that's ridiculous. I don't understand. Why would it cost that much? And you can easily, again, unemotionally justify, okay, well, I've been doing this for X amount of time, and here are the services you'll get from me and the quality. And and if that's not within your budget, I completely understand. I hope, things work out well for you. Unfortunately, I'm not able to go lower for this scope of work, and just kind of be okay. It's one of those red flags, because if they're going to nickel and dime the price before you even get started, and I think we've mentioned this before, there's some weird thing that happens across the board. The people who are most finicky about the budgets tend to be the worst people to work with. They will ask for the world. They'll be the micromanagers. They'll want revision upon revision upon revision and try to do the scope creep. And they just are the ones that you're going to end up complaining about the most. Whereas the ones who pay full rate tend to be much easier and better to work with. So, you don't have to feel bad about, quote, losing a client that's not willing to value your services, because if they won't before they even work with you, chances are they never will.
What we're kind of talking about, the other reason why getting the price out of the way first, is this idea called price bracketing. And essentially, the person that puts the price out there first sets that anchor. And that's the anchor against which the other side is fighting against. So if someone, let's say your price is $1,000 a month, and they say, well, my budget's $500. Now you have an uphill battle trying to get them up to something you'll deem acceptable. If you come out first and say, okay, the price for this is between $1,000 and $2,000. Now they have to kind of work to get you down. So you can do that by reducing the scope, saying, okay, if that's too much, what is your budget? Let's see what we can do scope-wise to meet you there. And when we do proposals, we try to do 2 or 3 different price options. That also helps give them choices so that even if your high price is too much, we can find a middle ground.
And the other thing I would say is, and this comes up a lot when you get to pricing, is don't let the prospect back you into a corner. Again, this is a mistake I made a few times before I realized this isn't working for me. And what I mean by that is it kind of falls into that, I forget which client was in that carousel, where the one where they're trying to get you, they're questioning your value. And they're trying to get you to like sort of fight for the job. Like, how low can you go, kind of thing.
The penny pincher.
I think
love
it's a
your
mix
work
of
and
that.
everything you do, but can you do it for less?
That's a lot more polite than some of the prospects I've dealt with. Would you remember we dealt with one prospect? It was for a podcast branding project, and we told them the pricing, and the first thing they said was, well, I've talked to a bunch of other people who are much lower priced than that. You know, what is it? I'm not really hearing what you do that offers any value. How are you going to offer me value for that? And a lot of prospects will do that. They will ask you questions along those lines. They'll say things like, I'm talking to 50 other people, and most of them are charging lower prices, and they do this, and they're willing to do all of this for this low price. So what do I get out of working with you? Why am I paying more? What's so great about you, essentially, is what they're asking. And it's really easy for people to fall into the trap of selling themselves. It's really easy for people to start going, oh, wow, I've got to prove my value to them. I have to start telling them, well, we have excellent support, and we do high quality work, and we're award-winning podcast producers, and we do X, Y, and Z, and we're so great, and please come work with us because we will treat you like a king or a queen. And the problem with that is you're giving the prospect all of the power in that situation. You're devaluing yourself in the sense of you're basically sending the message that, you know, hey, I really want this job. I might be willing to lower my price because I'm really selling myself hard. And it does send that message. And so actually the better thing to do is to start questioning them. So instead of responding with, I'm so great, here's all the things that I do, you can respond to that question with, well, it sounds like you have a lot of options that are in a lower price range, and that's awesome. Is there a reason you're not going with them? You know, put them on the spot. Have them explain.
I think people forget that you are interviewing potential clients as much as they're interviewing you. Mm-hmm. So you don't, it's not like a job interview where you're looking at them to, oh, please hire me. Although a regular job interview, you should be doing the same. You want to know if it's worthwhile for you to start this relationship. And it's not all about what you can do for them. It needs to also be about what they can do to you or do for you. There should be some mutual respect in that regard. And if you're already kind of getting, it almost sounds like gaslighting that you're getting before you've even signed on with a client, there's no reason, again, to expect that they'll be differently once you start working together. It sounds to me, if that initial conversation that was already happening, I would probably think, okay, well, now then if we start working together, they are constantly going to be trying to make me feel inferior and make me justify my whole existence. And I don't want to deal with that. I want to be with the clients who see what I offer and who value it and don't have to try to say, oh, well, you know, I can get somebody else to do the exact same thing. And, you know, if you can, okay, go ahead. See what the difference is. Hire the less qualified or less expensive or whatever their rationalization is. But it's something that I would rather avoid.